Well, welcome back. I hope that the exercise and stretching was really rejuvenating for you all. The next presenter is ready to go, and so without further ado, Dr. Terrell Shorb.
Hello, everyone. Here we go. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Phil Halliwell, who will be doing the next presentation. It has to do with National Park citizen science participation, exploring place attachment and stewardship. And it's a phenomenological study that he examined 22 undergraduate and graduate students' contributions to a citizen science effort in Grand Teton, Yellowstone National Parks, one of my favorite places in the world. And pre-post surveys and focus groups were used to investigate place attachment and stewardship motivations of the students. All this, I believe, towards supporting citizen science as a technique that offers participants a rich science experience, promoting bonding with place and encouraging stewardship. We need all of that we can get. And just today, Phil, I was reading the American Association of Retired Persons Bulletin. On the front page is a story about citizen science. So it's making its way. Phil is bringing an intergenerational approach too, which is very much needed and I very much appreciate. So, Phil, take it away.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're going back to you. Thank you, Terrell. Appreciate that. So I had the privilege of exploring something that I love, two things that I love over the last couple years. One is science research, and then the second piece is the national parks. They've always been close to my heart. And so this has been a joy. It's been an absolute joy. Not without ups and downs, but it's been a joy. I want to start here. This is my son, Henry. This was just a couple weeks ago. We were in Canyonlands National Park together. Side note, Henry came to me this morning and he said, "Dad, how long is your presentation going to be?" So Henry, buckle up, all right? So while we were there, I was in a visitor center, and I saw this sign, okay, in the corner of the visitor center, this message from the parks: find your park, okay? This is, I mean, it wasn't the first time I've seen this. It's actually from the National Park Service's 2016 Centennial Campaign, where they were just really have been encouraging people to bond with parks. Find your park. Where is your park? What is a special place for you? Okay? And so this has been the message that the Park Service has wanted to encourage over the last couple years. More recently, if we look at just, you know, this was Valentine's Day this year, a tweet from Yosemite. And they said, in the NPS, we sometimes talk about our heart parks. Some people have a special love for Yosemite's soaring granite walls. For others, Appalachian mountaintops or clear desert mornings lie closer to the heart and soul. Where's your heart park? So you can see this message that the Park Service is conveying. Find a place that you connect with. Find a place that you bond with, okay? So that was kind of the crux of my research, trying to understand, how do people bond with parks? And the Park Service is kind of working towards adopting a tool. I would say they are adopting a tool to allow people to bond with parks. But there's been very little research around that tool. And that tool that I explored was citizen science, okay? So a little bit of just definition around citizen science. Cornell Lab of Ornithology, they are a leader in kind of using citizen science and exploring its effectiveness. And so a quick definition, there are a number out there, but this one's probably most commonly looked at. Citizen science involves projects which volunteers partner with scientists to answer real-world questions. So this research strategy invites the general public, anyone, into the scientific research that's taking place, not just in national parks, although they are using it, but there's citizen science projects, just as Terrell mentioned, that are taking place all over the place, okay? But again, the concept is we invite individuals in, the public in, to participate and contribute to science, okay? So is it a win-win? Absolutely. The researchers see great benefit here. We're able to answer questions that we may have never been able to explore before. From a participant's perspective, there's a great educational opportunity there, okay? And doors may open that weren't previously open to learn, to explore topics that you might really be interested in. So again, getting after those difficult questions, okay? Questions that may have spanned large geographic areas or over long time scales, we can now begin to tackle, okay? Resource restraints. Now we have additional resources to be able to go after those questions. This is one of my favorite bullet points. Citizen science democratizes science. It, again, brings everyone into the conversation. Regardless of who you are, what your background is, you have a place. You have an opportunity to contribute to that discussion, to contribute to that work, and I think that's powerful. And then, as I mentioned, the educational experience, and then cultivating engaged stewards, okay? I'll add, in a national park perspective, if we look back at the history of the National Park Service, it was established in 1916 under the Organic Act. The Organic Act asked the National Park Service to do two things. And oftentimes these two things are looked at as conflicting mandates. The two things they were asked to do is, one, protect and preserve park environments, but the other thing is provide for the public enjoyment. Now, there's been great debate over those two things over the last couple years, over the last century. How do we provide for the public enjoyment but also protect these places? And there's a lot of activities out there that may do one but not the other. Citizen science is an activity that can be undertaken in the parks that not only protects the parks, but also has the opportunity to provide for some enjoyment, okay? And that's one of the powerful things in the parks that supports the parks. All right, so I began to consider, how does this experience impact participants? What's this like for them? There's been a lot of research on citizen science, the effectiveness of it, some economics around it, how good is the data. That's been looked at, and there's still more research to be done in those areas. But there hasn't been a lot of looking at, how does this impact people? What's the impact on the individuals, particularly in this national park setting? So again, I was looking at citizen science. Does it impact place attachment? Are we more inclined to bond with these parks? Do we now have heart parks, so to speak, okay? And then ultimately stewardship. If we're attached to these places, are we going to take care of them? That's the question. So let me get into my methods a little bit, start with the guiding research questions. Does participation in a national park citizen science experience, one, cultivate place attachment, and then secondarily, does it encourage stewardship, okay? And so that was kind of the foundational question. And then to add to that, what aspects of the citizen science experience might cultivate these things? So I wanted to know, is it happening? Does it have an effect on these participants? And then what aspects of the experience encourage this or discourage this, right? So the way I tackled this was through a phenomenological research study, mixed methods approach. Phenomenology basically attempts to understand the essence of a lived experience. So we want to understand the lived experience in the most pure sense, the most unadulterated sense from the people that lived it, okay? Again, the way that I approached this, again, was through a mixed method strategy, using surveys, using focus groups, integrating the qualitative and the quantitative components there. I felt like, for me, that was going to look at this question in the most thorough manner, all right? So I studied a citizen science cohort in May 2018. Grand Teton and Yellowstone were the parks that I looked at. The organization that was conducting the citizen science research was the Rocky Mountain Sustainability and Science Network. A little bit about this organization: collaboratively funded organization. As you heard Terrell mention, the cohort that I studied were 22 undergraduate and graduate researchers. Many of these were underrepresented populations in the STEM fields. This was a 2-week research effort. At the end of May, again, Grand Teton and Yellowstone, the whole so that whole ecosystem there. There was no student expense. So that's a key element of this experience. If we talk about democratizing science, that's essential. If we truly agree that it's important to integrate everyone into the science experience, making sure that it's affordable is a key aspect, okay? There was no prior experience necessary. You didn't need to own a pair of hiking boots. You didn't need to own a sleeping bag, right? Because those, like it or not, those are restrictions, okay? So that was important. The only requirement was that you had an interest in science, sustainability, and leadership. Again, opening the doors, okay? So the research. There were 3 research projects that took place over this 2-week effort, okay? So this is an ongoing research effort to study pollinators, presence and absence of pollinators in high alpine meadows throughout different locations throughout the parks. There was also some camera trap technology that was used to determine the effectiveness of camera traps for determining presence or absence of these species. Second project was a pika project. Again, that looked at presence or absence of pika in defined talus habitat throughout the parks. That also considered marmot and pika interactions, which are pretty common because they're in the same habitat. And then using camera traps as well. And then there was a final component, research element that considered cultural aspects of the parks. And this particular group looked at the indigenous signage that was posted throughout visitor centers and whatnot. Okay, so how well is the indigenous story told in those parks? So those were the 3 research efforts that were undertaken. Again, I studied these 22 students. Average age, a little bit on the demographics, average age about 24. 17 females, 5 males. Yes, that is disproportionate, but when you start to consider what's typical for citizen science, women are often are commonly represented, more commonly represented in citizen science. So there were 2 students from international hometowns, represented 12 states. 95% of these students were STEM students. So there's something to think about in that. One, again, the only requirement for participation was that you have an interest in science and sustainability. So this isn't entirely entirely surprising. But I think in future research, that's something I'm going to want to look at, is what's the effectiveness of this experience on individuals that may not have that attachment to science and sustainability. Ethnicity, 45% white, 32% Hispanic, 18% Asian or Asian American, and then 5% Caribbean Islander. I think there's a voice that's missing here, the African American voice. So again, in subsequent research, that's something I'm going to want to make sure I include. Further demographics, it was important to understand what kind of a relationship did these individuals have with the parks prior to the experience. 72% of the students had visited not just these parks, but any park, any national park, 10 or fewer times, okay? And then when we look more specifically at just these 2 parks, we see that 50% of the students have never visited these parks. That number climbs to 90% of the students when we look at visiting once or twice, okay? So most of these individuals did not have a large amount of experience with these particular parks. They were relatively new to these parks. So my research design, as I mentioned, a phenomenological approach, mixed method. I took a couple phases. First phase, you see here, this is the actual citizen science experience. I did a pre-survey, post-survey, okay? That was phase 1. Phase 2 waited 75 days post-experience. Wanted to look at a longitudinal, our lasting impact. What was the lasting impact? Phase 2 started, again, 75 days post-experience, and I had 2 focus groups. And I'll talk a little bit more about those focus groups and what they entailed. And then finally, throughout the project, 3 points throughout the project, I incorporated bracketing events or activities for myself. Bracketing, if you're not familiar with bracketing, key aspect of phenomenology. And so bracketing attempts, again, in an effort to look at this experience in the most pure and unadulterated sense, bracketing asked the researcher to step back and determine, is there any bias that I'm carrying into the experience? Do I have any preconceptions or beliefs that I might be carrying into the experience that would taint that pure look at the experience, okay? I'll talk a little bit more about bracketing in a second here. Again, the surveys, pre and post, use 2 instruments, place attachment inventory, which is commonly used when you're evaluating place attachment, and then also Cornell Lab had an excellent inventory or an instrument, motivations for environmental actions, to look at the stewardship piece. I did add a couple additional researcher questions. I'll get into those in a bit. And then there was an interesting wrinkle that I was encouraged to add into this research. I incorporated a retrospective pre-survey. And that retrospective pre-survey, what I did was I divided the cohort into 2 groups. One group did a true pre-survey at the beginning of the experience. The other 11 students did a retrospective pre-survey at the end of the experience, asking them to reflect and respond in hindsight. How would you have responded at the beginning of the experience? The intent of that approach was to understand response shift bias. Were people more inclined to overrate or underrate themselves prior to the experience, having not had the experience to kind of provide a frame of reference for them, okay? So that was a wrinkle that I included. I'll mention that in a bit. Focus groups, again, 75 days post-experience. Did a 60-minute focus group effort. Video conferencing, which actually worked really well. I was happy with how that turned out. 2 groups. I stratified them by individuals in group A that experienced the larger place attachment following the surveys, and then group B, those that experienced smaller shift in place attachment. 3 questions, that's really all the time I had to get through, and then I used this nominal group technique, which is really effective for organizing the focus groups. I mentioned bracketing, a good strategy to be able to kind of step away and shelf that bias that I may have been aware of or not been aware of, okay, either way. But reading just a lot of literature about bracketing, came up with a couple different strategies. I used mind mapping, so I went through some mind maps for myself to just identify where was some of that bias, but I felt like to be a little bit more thorough, another strategy that was encouraged in literature was to conduct interviews, or I say to conduct interviews, have someone interview me. And so that individual was able to press into a couple of the things that I may not have necessarily been aware of. So it was really helpful to take on these 2 steps in order to have what I felt like was a thorough bracketing effort. So my findings, what did we learn? First of all, I want to start. Let's look at place attachment. There's 2 components of place attachment in literature. First one is place identity. We bond with places for a couple reasons, but place identity considers emotional, social, or spiritual connections. Why do we feel a relationship to a place? Sometimes it's because of the social experience that we have there. Sometimes it's because of the spiritual experience. That falls under the category of place identity. The second category when we're talking place attachment is place dependence. This is doing what I like to do. We can probably all think of a place that is special to us, and maybe you like that place because you get to do what you like to do there. Maybe you like to go running, biking, kayaking. Maybe you like to do science there, all right? So those are the 2 elements of place attachment. Let's look at results. So our results, a lot of numbers here, but I want to point out just a couple. Each element, place identity and place dependence, as well as the overall place attachment, showed statistically significant shift from pre-experience to post-experience. So people were becoming more attached to these parks as a result of a citizen science experience. What also jumped out was place identity outplaced place dependence. We were more inclined to bond with these parks as a result of the social, emotional, or spiritual experience that we had, all right? And that's important. I'm going to come back to that. But place identity was the significant one that stood out. Again, through the focus groups, a number of themes emerged. I'm going to get into these themes a little bit later, but some significant themes. But hiking, being immersed in the park, these were things that encouraged place attachment. Doing science, all of these were major themes that emerged that people talked about that said, this is why I felt the way I did after the experience. Second component, stewardship. All right, and conveniently, stewardship is broken into two different categories as well. So we have internal stewardship motivations, and then we have external stewardship motivations. Internal stewardship motivations say that I'm going to steward parks because it's important to me. It matters to me internally. Or I find it to be a lot of fun. I take care of these places because it's fun. But ultimately, it matters to me. That's internal. External is I'm stewarding these places for maybe my children. I'm stewarding these places because, hey, it looks good to other people, okay? So those are stewardship motivations, internal and external. And again, we'll take a quick look at the results. Again, we saw statistically significant move. People became more motivated to steward these parks as a result of doing citizen science in the parks. And then notably, internal motivations were stronger than external motivations. We were more inclined to steward. Our motivations for stewardship were stronger as a result of the internal motivations. I mentioned I asked a couple of additional questions to kind of explore stewardship in a little bit more depth. I looked at these stewardship actions. So visiting would you visit the parks in the future? Would you encourage others to visit? Would you make a donation? Would you volunteer in the parks? Would you write to a representative? And would you join an advocacy group? Okay? And again, statistically significant shift for all of these. People were more motivated to do any one of these than they were prior to the experience. Things that stood out to me, make a donation. Not once throughout the experience was economics of stewardship ever brought up. Not at any point. Yet that saw the largest shift. That's impressive, okay? Would you encourage others to visit? That was the strongest element of these stewardship actions. And I point that out because, looking back, the social component is huge here, all right? And I'm going to talk more to that in a bit. But people want to experience these places with other people, okay? They've got a lot of reasons to like these places, but being with other people is important. All right, stewardship themes. These were just some of the themes that emerged. Again, look for the social component. Like-minded people, learning from other people, exposure to others. Again, learning from other people. The social component was huge in motivating stewardship. Other notable findings. This was interesting. Stewardship of Grand Teton or Yellowstone is very important to me. We saw, again, a statistically significant shift. However, I'll also note, participants that had never visited had stronger stewardship motivations. I never saw that one coming, okay? If you've never visited the park, you're more likely to steward the parks than those that have. That was really interesting. Another interesting piece of the data was that I asked the question, is the area encompassing Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park special to you? Prior to the experience, 45% said yes. Following the experience, 100%. Every single individual felt like these were special places after the experience. I mentioned the retrospective pre-survey. Again, this detected response shift bias. Did people overrate or underrate themselves? I want to move along here, but I want to point out the only element when we're looking at place attachment or motivations for environmental action, stewardship, was the internal motivations that saw that statistically significant move. However, every stewardship action that I mentioned earlier did see a statistically significant shift. I'll jump over that. What factors drove place attachment and stewardship? So this was answering that second piece of my guiding questions. And so a couple themes emerge. I'm just going to point those out as we wrap up here. The first one was the aesthetics of the place. It was notable. People commented on it. Remember, 50% of the individuals had never been to these places before. These were powerful places, a sense of awe, okay? We saw a functional connection. I'm out doing this, that, or the other thing, science, hiking, kayaking, whatever it might be. And while people were talking about those experiences, they were talking about the grandeur of the setting they were in. It's important. One individual said, I think for me, one thing, one of the things is, especially growing up outside of DC in a very urban environment, sort of getting in the wilderness in a place as beautiful as the national parks is almost sort of spiritual. You can see the place identity, the spiritual component emerge. Doing science. I mean, that's kind of like, that was a given. Like yeah, it's citizen science. I'm studying citizen. Why wouldn't that, you know? But it was important. People brought up the opportunity to do science in an iconic location. This is special. I mean, this isn't like just going in your backyard and doing science. That was significant for them, okay? There was a consistent theme of learning throughout the experience. That mattered. Again, building a relationship with that place, it mattered to continually be learning about that place. Individual said, I think the science and the research that we did made me feel more connected. I've visited Yellowstone and Teton before, and I've never done that before. That was a whole new dimension for me. So I thought that was pretty powerful. The third theme, and I've alluded to this already, the social experience. I didn't see this coming. I thought it was, hey, doing science in a beautiful place. That should be enough, right? But the social experience was huge, all right? Learning from others, working together. One individual, this is notable, one individual at the very end of the focus group said, I just miss everyone. And as a researcher, it would have been maybe easy to kind of glance right past that. We were wrapping up the experience, wrapping up the focus group. But that individual could have said, you know, I just miss Jackson Lake, or I really miss the Lamar Valley, or I miss seeing the bison, but she didn't. She said, I miss everyone. She was missing the people that were with her on the experience. It's important. We're not all together anymore, but definitely being together made a difference in my life because I'm more excited about getting out there into the world. Like-minded people, similar, okay? There's a similar component to the social experience. Sharing beliefs. All right? We're not always around people that share our beliefs, but when we are, we can be encouraged in those beliefs. So these individuals came into the experience with a desire for sustainability and some degree of appreciation for the parks. Those ethics, those beliefs were amplified as a result of being around other people. This quote says it all. When I'm in school or at work, a lot of people don't seem to care about it. But when I got into the group, I felt like everyone cared and everyone had the same feelings and we were really excited about it. Being there and doing that kind of stuff, it was really awesome. I don't see that around campus. So being around like-minded people, and the last thing that jumped out to me through this research was the impact of hiking. Hiking, I glanced right past this to begin with. You know, I thought, oh, you know, that's just transport. We're just getting from A to B, right? For these students, for these individuals, this was way more impactful than I ever expected it to be. Interacting with the landscape in a sensory, social, and educational way. I mean, around every turn, there was a new opportunity to learn about the place they were at, which was absolutely huge. These hikes provided, to getting to some of the research locations, provided some of the strongest memories that these individuals had. It was important. This individual said, there's some sort of relationship that is built when you're walking on these parks. You're observing, you're feeling, you're using your senses. You're balancing all those things. The hikes just kind of brought out some sort of connection that I felt. I feel like I want to return to do these things again. All right? It's important. Hiking was important. Just some conclusions. Results indicate that citizen science can be a powerful tool to facilitate place attachment and stewardship. My recommendations, these are very brief, but I'll hit on 3 bullet points. 1, continue to promote citizen science. The NPS continues to promote citizen science, which their second century vision includes citizen science. Design projects that highlight the social element. Design projects that incorporate hiking. Those were key factors. As far as sharing this information, I did present it at the Yellowstone Science Conference back in the fall. I'll be sharing this at the Ecological Society of America conference in the summer. I'll certainly be passing it along to certain individuals within the NPS, and then I'm working on an article for the U.S. Forest Service looking at public lands as well, and the impact there. So future research, I will continue this research this coming May. looking at another cohort of individuals that are doing science. Want to expand this to look at other publicly protected areas, again, whether those are national parks, other national parks, or whether we're going to consider some Forest Service or BLM lands, okay? Important. Also looking at other citizen science programs. So with that, I have to thank some people that were absolutely critical. Dr. Schorb, I just couldn't ask for a better core faculty member, and someone that totally appreciates the parks as much as I do. A wonderful committee, Dr. Teresa Crimmins, Dr. Julie Dunlap, Dr. Gillian Bowser, and additionally Vicki Young was essential in this research. So thank you. Thank you.
So thank you. You just helped me hugely in hopefully a successful focus group next week.
Good.
But I'm having a hard time getting everybody scheduled for. Did you do yours on Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Cool. I'd like to have your positive feedback on.
Yep. Yeah,
recommendation
absolutely.
of
It was
that
a great platform.
So I know that I don't want my groups too big or too small, so I'm wondering how much I push to try to get people scheduled.
Yeah.
And looking at how you said you only got through 3 questions in an hour.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how many people were in the group.
So one group was 4, one group was 5.
Okay.
So everyone was invited, and almost everyone was either able to attend, or if they were not able to attend, they explained to me why they weren't able to attend, which I felt like was, were they just done with the research? But that was not necessarily the case. So I used kind of a doodle poll prior to the experience to find times that would work for the majority of the participants. And then a lot of research around focus groups. You don't want to get too big. Probably 12 would have been too big. So anywhere from 4 to 12 was acceptable. So.
Okay, and then the part about somebody interviewing you to draw out the validity of what you were seeing was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How do they know what to ask you?
So again, I went through that mind mapping experience individually by myself. Prior to my interview with them, I shared my mind map with them. Okay, and then as an interview, I shared that mind map with them, and they had some time prior, obviously, having looked at it, to see little themes that may emerge or things that they wanted to press into. And then I kind of, again, walked through that map with them, what I was thinking, and they pressed into those themes. So that's how that unfolded.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And how did you find that? Is it just like Henry did it?
He would have been good at it. Yeah. So I looked for somebody that had a lot of experience with phenomenology. So that was familiar with that research methodology, and was familiar with bracketing, and knew what I wanted to achieve, and was able to press into that. Thanks, Aaron. Yep.
I'm going to try not to cry, because that was beautiful, man. And to be a part of that process and to see your level of academia, to add mixed methods and to add retrospective pre-surveys and the focus group and the bracketing, it was just the level of academia on that is really powerful. But coupled with it, seeing that this is that the citizen science, makes science approachable, breaks down barriers, but then also how it creates meaningful experiences. And I just wanted to shout out to you about being appreciative of being part of that focus group, just kind of looking at it from the outside. And I was struck it was palpable that this was a transformational experience. And I just had to say that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. And part of the reason why I wanted to look at this 75 days post experience was to understand this experience after you came off the mountain, like literally and figuratively. Okay. Sure, we have this experience, and a lot of times there's a high, right? But was there a lasting impact? And sure, 75 days is 75 days. It's not 7 years. But, there was time in between that experience and a lot had transpired. And again, I continued to see that it did have that lasting impact. So it was important. Yep.
Great, Phil. That was great. And as, a statistician, I loved your numbers. Great work.
Good.
Looked
Thank
awesome.
you.
And also, for my own research, I loved that you found hiking was a serious component for these students. Could you talk to me a little bit about the hikes? Like, how long were they? Were they steep? Were they pretty easy, or just through beautiful? Talk a little bit about the hikes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, first of all, you're in bear country. So, at no point in the experience was a student permitted to travel alone. So you weren't permitted to just go out for a run in the morning on a trail. You weren't permitted to just go for a hike without another individual with you, and you did need to have bear spray with you when you traveled. So those are aspects of the experience, and probably contributed to the social experience. So all different types of hikes. They ranged from the entire group hiking together, so 22 people together, to just 2 individuals maybe traveling through. A lot of the hikes, the majority of the hikes, were like 7 to 8 individuals. And I did see I didn't mention some of these comments, but those were like efficacy builders. Like, people were more confident after they went on these hikes. They realized, one individual said, I didn't think I could do that hike, and then I went and did it, and I feel so much better about myself. So wide range of different types of hikes through different terrain. Certainly meadows. Some of the pikey groups were getting to higher elevations. You certainly were encountering wildlife. We had one instance where the group had to pack up everything because there was a sow and 2 cubs coming right through a talus field. And so it was raw, it was real. Another instance where we had bison run through a meadow that we were studying. And so you kind of had to be on your toes. And that adds a whole new aspect to that hiking and experience. But people were experiencing these parks in, I said, that sensory way, touching, feeling, smelling, even tasting plants, right? They were experiencing. And one notable thing is, I looked at this, I said, well, gosh, we traveled around in vans. Why aren't you mentioning the vans? Hikes are different than traveling around in cars, right? So that was important. And so, I don't know where Rosaline is, but okay, all right. So that's the importance of hiking. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for your research.
Yeah.
I am a professional park ranger, and I work in the front country. And I'm trying to use that position to connect people in the community with their open space in the front country. And I wonder how you see this applicable to the front country, because we do use citizen science on a small scale, but I'd like to implement it in a larger scale, especially considering the outcomes of your results. But I kind of wanted to hear from you on that piece.
Yeah. So again, these are unique parks, and so but I think there's appropriate research that needs to take place in other locations. I think every park has reasons why people may appreciate it, whether it's historic value or just the wildness of it. But I think without question, there's those aspects that can be highlighted for individuals that are participating in citizen science. And then, again, I come back to just the privilege of contributing to it in these places, whether it's front country, back country. You have some skin in the game. You're now involved. You're not just a visitor, right? You're more than a visitor. You're contributing. And so wherever that park might be, I think citizen science has a significant place in giving people I think maybe a place in that park. And again, bonding with that park. Yep.
I loved your presentation. Thank you. I have a quick question about the surveys. When you did the pre and post surveys, were those like how close to the actual experience was it? Were they right before, right after? And then how did you decide that 75 days was a good length of time to wait before doing focus groups?
Yeah, good question. First of all, the surveys were right before and right after. I mean, within, I would say, 8 hours of the experience. So that was important. And then the 75 days post experience, that was just there. I looked for research that said, hey, you should look at 3 months or 6 months or whatever it might be. Didn't really find that. So just looking at just kind of what I felt like was a reasonable time frame for people to get back, and I use the term normalize, but you get what I'm saying, to kind of come off that experience. So use that, and yeah, I mean, you could have looked at a different time frame, but that seemed to be an appropriate and reasonable time frame. And the other thing was, initially I went into it with looking at wanting to look at it anywhere from like 60 to 90 days, and I gave that window last year at this time. I gave that window, not knowing that I wanted the majority of participants to be involved. So I tried to find within that 60 to 90 days, what was the date that most people could be involved. So that was part of it. Yep.